The mystery of 40. When destiny enters the picture. They say that life begins at 40. But is that really just a popular saying? Or is there something bigger, deeper, happening exactly at this stage? Now think with me. Why do so many people only discover their life mission after the age of 40, and not before? The answer is not just in chronological time. It's in something that goes beyond the flesh, beyond calendars and clocks. It is in the spiritual awakening that only happens when the soul, tired of external battles, begins to listen to its true inner voice. Let's go back in time for a moment. Imagine a 22-year-old woman, full of dreams, rush, expectations, and a huge desire to prove that she can beat the world. In everyone's eyes, she is at her peak, but inside, she feels out of place. She tries different paths. She tries to follow what her parents expect, what society values, what the market demands. But nothing fits. Nothing satisfies. It's as if she's running inside a maze, touching invisible walls, not knowing which direction leads to the exit. This same woman, at 41, wakes up on an ordinary morning, with the sun shining through the window, and something is different. There was no spiritual explosion, no grandiose event. But there is a new silence inside her, a kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. For the first time, she feels like she is exactly where she is supposed to be. And do you know what changed? She stopped running, and he started listening. At 40, something happens that science, psychology, and even spiritual traditions recognize, the moment when everything that was confusing begins to align. Be part of our spiritual family. Subscribe to the channel today and comment "I believe" below as a symbol that you accept your role in this great transition. Let your energy be counted among the chosen. The time is now. According to a survey by Stanford University, the human brain reaches its peak capacity for emotional and rational integration between 38 and 45 years old. This means that, during this period, the mind becomes capable of connecting what we feel with what we think, what we experience with what we believe, and what we want with who we really are. In other words, it is when the soul begins to speak clearly, and it doesn't stop there. Astrology calls this phase Saturn return, an event that happens approximately every 29 years and symbolizes a call for spiritual maturation, breaking old patterns and aligning with true purpose. In practice, it's as if the universe says, "Now you're ready." But why doesn't this maturity arrive sooner? Because before 40, we are under construction. We are pulled out by models of success, by social pressures, by inherited fears, by the desire to be accepted. We are learning to walk spiritually, stumbling over beliefs, desires, emotional wounds, doubts. It's like being in a preparatory stage, where every mistake, every frustration, and every silence become ingredients of what will become an awakening. This is the key. The chosen one is not born ready. He is shaped by time, losses, and restarts. And here's something curious that few know. In several spiritual cultures, the number 40 represents transformation. In the Bible, the flood lasted 40 days. Moses spent 40 years in the desert. Jesus fasted for 40 days before beginning his ministry. In Islam, the Prophet Muhammad was 40 years old when he received his first revelation. Coincidence? Or a spiritual pattern that spans eras and traditions? And when we bring this symbol into our modern reality, it continues to resonate. It is at this stage that most people begin to question themselves, not about what they do, but why do they do? Not about what they achieved, but what they lost of themselves along the way. So, if you're approaching 40 or you're already there and feel like your life hasn't really begun yet, no, there's nothing wrong with you. On the contrary, there is something extremely right about to bloom. Because the chosen one does not follow the times of the crowd. He follows the time of the Spirit. And if you feel that this message pulses inside your chest, as if it were speaking directly to you, this is no coincidence. There is no chance. There is called. There is preparation, and there is the right time to understand that everything that seemed like a delay was just the universe preparing you for the most authentic chapter of your existence. At 40, Old age does not begin. The truth begins. And that's when everything changes. Your journey is just beginning. It's time to regain your strength and build a new path. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community that is awakening to the truth. When time stops being a clock and becomes a revelation. Have you ever felt like you're always chasing something but never getting there? As if there was an invisible clock pushing you to meet goals, meet deadlines, achieve milestones. And yet, the emptiness is still there? For most of life, that's how it works. We are taught to measure our value by age. By the age of 25, you have to have a degree. At 30, financial stability. At 35, family. And when 40 arrives, many go into crisis. But what if this is all based on a completely wrong idea of time? Some say that time is an enemy, but the chosen ones learn that he is, in fact, a silent instructor. After 40, this lesson begins to reveal itself. Human time and divine time do not follow the same calendar. In the traditional view, time is linear: childhood, youth, maturity, old age. But for the spiritual, time is cyclical and intelligent. It is not measured by years lived, but by levels of consciousness achieved. Research from Harvard University, conducted between 2018 and 2022, demonstrated that people over 40 were more likely to experience what researchers called psychological redemption, the ability to reframe past failures as preparation for the future. This demonstrates that at this stage, there is a greater mental and spiritual willingness to understand one's own path as part of a greater plan. This is where the concept of divine time. Unlike the time of the world, divine time is not in a hurry. He respects processes. It reveals little by little the purpose that has always been there, hidden beneath layers of fear, insecurity, and comparisons. And often, it only manifests after the soul goes through what it needed to go through. A pattern that spans centuries. If we look at historical figures linked to spirituality or personal transformation, there is a pattern that repeats itself. Moses, according to Judeo-Christian tradition, received his divine mission at the age of 40, when he fled Egypt and began his transition in the desert. Muhammad, prophet of Islam, was 40 years old when he received his first revelation on Mount Hira, beginning his role as a spiritual messenger. Jesus Christ, after his baptism by John, spent 40 days in the desert facing temptations before beginning his public mission. And even in Eastern mythology, Buddha Siddhartha Gautama, after years of searching, reached his enlightenment between the ages of 35 and 40 after intense meditation under the Bodhi fig tree. This number is not symbolic for nothing. In scriptures and mystical traditions, 40 represents preparation, transition, and revelation. It's not a random number, it's a spiritual frequency of maturity and clarity. So when someone wakes up at 40, it's not a delay, it's divine alignment. The silence that brings meaning. Many report that upon reaching this phase, they feel an internal change. The rush lessens. The need to please, prove, or run dissolves. What once caused anxiety now seems unimportant. Time stops being something to be controlled and becomes something to be trusted. It's as if suddenly everything that seemed out of place in my youth started to fall into place. This happens because at 40, the mind has lived enough to understand that the delays were not failures. They were conscious deviations from preparation. The doors that didn't open, protection. The relationships that ended, redirection. The plans that didn't work out, lapidary. According to a survey by Global Wellness Institute, 2021, adults between 40 and 50 years old are those who most seek meditation practices, self-knowledge, and non-institutionalized spirituality. This shows a thirst for reconnection, not with the external world but with one's own essence. Awakening is not a moment, it is a turning point. Many believe that spiritual awakening is a sudden, magical event. But the truth is that he is built in silence, in sleepless nights, in losses that seemed meaningless, in frustrations that tore the heart. The difference is that at 40, the soul finally has the maturity to understand that everything was part of a greater plan. At this point, the chosen one begins to realize that it's not late, it's exactly on time. He understands that everything is being guided by an invisible force, and that the more he trusts this flow, the more things flow. It's as if the universe is whispering, "Now you are ready for what you came here to do." When you understand that time is not the enemy but the master, a new relationship with life is born. At 40, you're not at the end of anything. You're at the beginning of real alignment with your essence. Everything that came before was training. Everything that comes after will be a mission. Time is not running against you. He is walking by your side in the exact rhythm of your destination. It's time to regain your strength and build a new path. If this video is making sense to you, don't stop here. Click sign up now and discover the next step towards your transformation. When the soul awakens and purpose takes form, for much of our lives, we look for answers in the wrong places. We tried to fit our essence into ready-made molds. We followed paths that seemed promising just because everyone around us was following them. But still, a silent uneasiness remained. Is that all? At 40, something changes irreversibly. The feeling of living on autopilot gives way to a silent but insistent call. This moment is not common. It is late spiritual awakening. And although many fear it, it is the beginning of the greatest reunion a person can have, the reunion with their inner mission. What actually is spiritual awakening? Contrary to popular belief, spiritual awakening is not an extraordinary or mystical event that happens in a spectacular way. It is a gradual, often silent process that begins when the tired mind begins to become silent, and the heart is finally heard. This awakening can be caused by a personal crisis, a significant loss, or even the tiredness of trying to be what others expect. Suddenly, titles lose importance, external achievements seem empty, and a thirst is born for something that cannot be bought, cannot be seen, but feel. It's as if a veil falls. Everything that seemed essential, status, approval, comparison, loses its luster. What remains is the question that has accompanied us since we arrived in the world, but which only now has the courage to surface. Why am I here? Purpose is not chosen. It is revealed. Many believe that finding your life purpose is like choosing a profession or setting a goal. But the truth is different. The true purpose, it is not something that is decided, but something that is revealed. And this revelation only happens when the soul is ready to listen, and the ego quiets down enough to leave room for the truth. According to a study published by Psychology Today, M 2021, most people only begin to notice connections between their past experiences and their life mission around the age of 40. This is due to what researchers call narrative integration, the ability to look back and extract meaning from adversities, tracing a common thread that was previously hidden. This means that instead of inventing a purpose, you begin to identify patterns in your pains, repetitions in your challenges, and forgotten talents that insist on returning. Everything that seemed like a mess starts to make sense. Every loss, every mistake, every unexpected turn is now part of an alignment plan, the invisible gears that have always been in motion. For decades, you may have felt lost, not because of a lack of effort, but because you were looking outside for answers. But the true calling comes from within. He was never absent. It was just covered up by the voices of fear, haste, and comparison. Spiritual awakening happens exactly when you stop seeking approval and start seeking true. It is at this point that purpose reveals itself as something that already existed, but can only now be understood. It's not something new. It's something of yours, old, familiar, but neglected. This process is similar to what the ancients called remembrance of the soul. In several spiritual traditions, including Greek philosophy with Plato, there is the idea that we came into the world with a purpose, but we forget it when we are born. Awakening is precisely that moment when we remember. What purpose is not? It is important to dispel myths. Purpose is not fame. It is not financial success, nor a perfect path where everything works out. It also does not need to be linked to a specific occupation. Your purpose may be to touch lives with words, heal with listening, Transform environments with your presence. Lead with compassion or even inspire through your story of overcoming. What matters is that He transforms the environment you pass through, even if in silence. Data that confirms the turnaround after 40. A survey carried out by Gallup M 2020 with more than 10,000 adults revealed that the level of satisfaction with one's own trajectory only begins to increase considerably after the age of 42. This is directly related to discovering a deeper meaning in life and not to external factors. Another relevant data comes from the London School of Economics, which identified a peak in unhappiness between the ages of 35 and 39, followed by a gradual increase in psychological well-being after age 40, just when many begin to look inward for more authentic answers. In other words, it is natural to feel disconnected before 40. Discomfort is part of the path. It is not a sign of failure, but of gestation of a new version of yourself. Spiritual awakening is not the end of a process. It is the point where everything begins to make sense. At 40, the soul finally finds space to speak, and the purpose stops being a doubt and becomes a north. If you feel like you're at this point in your life, don't fight this phase. Honor what it represents, the beginning of your real mission. Because when the spirit wakes up, the whole world changes color. Share this knowledge with the world. Together, we can spread this message and help more people become free. Subscribe to the channel and send this video to anyone who needs to hear this truth. When being yourself stops being a weight and becomes a power. For a long time, we molded our behavior to fit into spaces that were not made for us. We repress opinions, silence desires, and conform to standards that seemed correct, but that, deep down, took us away from who we really are. Until at some point along the way, usually around 40, something inside us refuses to keep pretending. That's where the true self-knowledge begins, and with it, a strength emerges that does not come from screaming, but from silence. The freedom to be whole. Knowing yourself is not a luxury. It's emotional survival. During youth, most decisions are guided by external expectations: career, relationships, appearance, approval. Everything revolves around acceptance. But over time, this mask starts to weigh down, and what once seemed necessary becomes oppressive. The philosopher Carl Jung, in his works on the individuation process, said that the maturation of human beings only occurs when they begin to integrate their conscious and unconscious aspects. That is, when they stop being who others want them to be and begin to be who they really are. This process rarely happens before 40. That's because until then, we're busy accumulating experiences, making mistakes, falling, trying to fit in. But when this phase passes, the urgency arises to free yourself from all invented versions and discover the authentic self that has been there all along, hidden beneath layers of fear and conditioning. The identity that is reborn from losses. Deep self-knowledge does not emerge in moments of comfort. It usually emerges after frustrations, breakups, bankruptcies, or disappointments, when everything that served as external support disappears, and there is only one question left. Who am I without all this? The answer does not come immediately. It is built with courage. Courage to look inside without filters, to face shadows, to recognize old wounds. But it is precisely this dive that liberates. According to a survey by American Sociological Review, people between the ages of 40 and 55 have the highest levels of self-acceptance and freedom of expression among all age groups. This means that the ability to live truthfully, without masks, reaches its peak precisely during this period, freeing yourself from roles that no longer fit. With self-knowledge comes a natural movement, disidentification with roles that no longer make sense. It can be the role of the family savior, the perfect employee, the partner who always gives in, the friend who never says no. When you realize that these characters are not your essence, something breaks. And at the same time, something rebuilds. You begin to draw healthy limits to say no without guilt, to take a stand without fear of rejection, because you discover that true acceptance comes from inside, and that pleasing everyone is the quickest recipe for losing yourself. It is at this point that inner freedom flourishes. Freedom is not doing everything. It is not being held hostage by anything. Inner freedom does not mean absence of responsibility. It is also not rebellion or isolation. Means live in peace with your choices, without the need to justify each step, without carrying the weight of other people's opinions as if they were absolute truths. It's being comfortable with silence. It's taking pleasure in being alone. It's making decisions based on your truth, not the pressure of being accepted. A survey conducted by Harvard Medical School between 2019 and 2022 revealed that people who actively practice self-knowledge through reflection, therapeutic writing, or meditation develop higher levels of emotional resilience and autonomy. In other words, the more you know yourself, the less you depend on the world to feel good. What happens when you live for yourself and not for others? The moment you stop seeking validation is liberating. Suddenly, criticism doesn't hurt like it used to. Comparisons lose their meaning. Life begins to shape itself from the inside out, not the other way around. You start to attract more genuine connections, create opportunities that are more aligned with your values, and walk lightly. That's because, when you live authentically, the universe responds with synchronicity. And the most interesting thing, when you allow yourself to be yourself without censorship, you also inspire others to do the same. Inner freedom is contagious. It does not need to be imposed. It reveals itself through the way you occupy the world. Self-knowledge is the key that unlocks all invisible prisons. And inner freedom is the natural state of those who reconcile themselves with themselves. At 40, this reconciliation is no longer optional. It becomes essential. Living authentically is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Because when you allow yourself to be real, you finally understand what it's like to live without needing to ask permission to exist. To not miss any message from God, click the subscribe button. Write "I'm ready" in the comments and start aligning your energy with the transformation that is coming. When silence speaks and intuition leads, there is a kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books. It also doesn't come from other people's advice or ready-made formulas. This wisdom is born from silence, a silence that many avoid, but that is sacred to those who have learned to listen with their hearts. At 40, this silence stops being uncomfortable and becomes a refuge. At this point in the journey, you begin to realize that life has always spoken to you. But until then, the rush, the external noise, and the constant search for answers in the world drowned out the only voice that really mattered: your intuition. The inner voice that was always there. Intuition is not a gift exclusive to a few. It is a natural ability, an internal radar that captures subtle signals, sensations, and perceptions beyond logic. However, for much of our lives, we learn to ignore it. We have been conditioned to follow rules, arguments, statistics, and expectations. And so we stop hearing what the body whispered, what the heart screamed, what the soul already knew. But this changes over time. Studies conducted by University of Leeds, United Kingdom, identified that intuition is a real form of information processing that occurs subconsciously. What's more, research has shown that individuals with greater life experience, especially over the age of 40, tend to make more accurate, intuitive decisions because they already have an internal repertoire made up of accumulated experiences. In other words, at 40, what previously seemed like just a gut feeling becomes a reliable compass. The wisdom that comes from within. Instead of looking outside for answers, you start to trust what you feel inside, and that trust changes everything. You realize, for example, that uneasiness around certain people wasn't paranoia. It was discernment. That shiver when entering certain places was no coincidence. It was an energetic alert. That feeling of peace in the face of certain choices was not a coincidence. It was confirmation. Intuition manifests itself in many ways: a pit in the stomach, a recurring dream, a phrase that repeats itself, a number that appears all the time. And little by little, you stop doubting. Start respecting this subtle channel, and what was once doubt becomes direction, solitude as a portal. But to hear that voice, you need silence. Not the forced silence of the absence of noise, but the conscious silence of sacred solitude, voluntary solitude, sought not through rejection but through integration, a space where you find yourself, without masks, without distractions, without rushing. For a long time, the idea of being alone was associated with abandonment. But when self-knowledge matures, solitude stops being a punishment and turns into a blessing. It becomes a kind of personal temple, where you can reflect, heal, create, and reconnect with your deepest essence. A study of the University of Massachusetts, published in 2020, revealed that adults who spend regular periods in mindful solitude report greater mental clarity, increased creativity, and higher levels of life satisfaction. This is not about isolation, but about reconnection. Encounter with the divine within yourself. In solitude, intuition strengthens. The mind slows down, the heart speaks louder, and the sacred approaches. What previously seemed distant, God, the universe, the spirit, begins to be felt in everyday life, in small things, in a deep breath, in a sunset, in an unexpected tear. You realize you were never truly alone. There was always a subtle presence guiding you, even in moments of greatest pain. And now, with more spiritual maturity, you learn to recognize this presence, learn to trust her. This is what sacred solitude is, an inner space where you remember who you are, where you came from, and where you are going. This is where fear gives way to faith, where haste gives way to intuition, where lack dissolves into completeness. The practice that transforms living guided by intuition and nourished by solitude requires practice. It can be through meditation, reflective writing, silent contemplation, or even solitary walks in nature. The important thing is to create moments where the external calms down so that the internal can express itself. And the result of this is not just inner peace. It is clarity of purpose, more assertive decisions, healthier relationships, and a lighter life. You start to trust yourself more. And when you trust yourself more, you lose yourself less in other people's paths. At 40, the awakening of intuition and the embrace of solitude are no coincidence. They are the natural next step for those who are in alignment with their own truth. They do not mean isolation, but reconnection. They are not renunciation of the world. They are reconciliation with what is purest within you. Because when you learn to listen to yourself, you discover that all the answers you were looking for were always there. In silence, the soul speaks, and finally, you listen. If you feel this calling within you, subscribe to the channel and write "I am chosen" in the comments. Declare that you are ready to receive what is already in store for you. The beginning of everything, the power of being who you always were. At 40, most people believe they are entering the final stretch of something, as if life was slowing down, time was getting shorter, and the chances were getting smaller and smaller. But the truth is different. That's the real starting point. Everything that came before was just the rehearsal. This phase of life does not mark closure. It marks alignment with the truest version of yourself. What seemed like delay was preparation. What hurt was part of the construction. What didn't work was what wasn't meant to be. And when a person understands this, she stops beating herself up for not getting there sooner. Everything was a brick at the base of its structure. It wasn't wasted time. There were necessary phases. The frustration in jobs that didn't make sense, the relationships that didn't last, the expectations that never came true. All of this served as fuel to get here with clarity. No step was in vain. Now, with more experience, you make informed decisions. He no longer lives on automatic. Recognizes patterns. Create new routes. Position yourself firmly. And the best, you don't need to explain yourself anymore. You understood that your life does not need to be understood by anyone other than yourself. You learned what works and what doesn't. Before, everything was tentative. Now, it's a conscious choice. You no longer let yourself be carried away by fads, empty promises, or social obligations. You realize that time, energy, and peace are valuable resources, and you learn to protect them all. If something doesn't add up, you walk away. If it doesn't represent you, you refuse. If it doesn't expand, you don't insist. This maturity did not come overnight. It was built, and most importantly, was conquered by you. Shifting focus from the outside to the inside. Before 40, the focus is on achieving recognition, stability, acceptance. After 40, the focus changes. It's about consistency, coherence, and tranquility. Life stops being a race and becomes a path with purpose. You stop following any direction just because it seems safe and start walking only where there is truth. You understand that not every opportunity is advancement, not all company is a connection, and not every routine is life. Now you choose carefully, because finally he knows what he wants, and even more so, what he no longer accepts. You stopped comparing yourself. Comparing yourself to others is a common trap, especially when you believe there is an ideal time to achieve certain goals. But after so many falls, starts, and learnings, you discover that what is right for others, it doesn't have to be right for you. The ruler changes. The parameters are yours. You define what success is, what freedom is, what happiness is, and that frees you. This mental independence is what differentiates those who live on autopilot from those who have truly awakened. What changes at 40 is the willingness to live differently. You no longer accept living with what makes you sick. He does not tolerate what he previously tolerated in the name of convenience, and mainly, you no longer accept wasting time on things that don't represent you. The priority changes, the rhythm changes, the choices change, but above all, it changes your perception of your own value. You stop diminishing yourself, start respecting yourself, and this respect for yourself starts to guide each decision. Data doesn't lie. This turnaround is real. According to the Gallup organization, 63% of adults over 40 reported feeling more connected to themselves than at any other stage in life. The study showed that people at this stage make decisions more firmly, trust their intuition more, and feel less need to please others. Another survey, carried out by Harvard Business Review, indicated that entrepreneurs over 40 are twice as successful in new businesses as younger ones. This is because they act with more clarity, focus, and self-knowledge. These data prove what is already known in practice. Spiritual, emotional, and mental maturity flourishes intensely at this stage of life. You're not starting late. It's starting at the right time. At 40, you don't need to prove anything to anyone, just need live your truth. It's now that everything comes together. It is now that your path stops being a search and becomes an answer. If you've made it this far, know that there's no more time to waste trying to be someone else. The moment is now. And he asks only one thing: courage to be who you always were. The awakening continues. If this video opened your eyes to truths you had never seen before, imagine what else you can discover. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content that will transform your life.